Can everybody hear me? Okay, there we go. Greetings. I'm Dred. I'm from Jamaica. It's a pleasure to be here. This is amazing. And I'm really happy to be talking with these three gentlemen that are all doing amazing things in Africa and across the world right now. So I want to bring them up on stage real quick. First, we're going to talk to Abubakar Nur Khalil. We're also going to be talking to Conor Okus from Spiral. Conor, come on up, buddy. And then Femi Longe from Khalil. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Look at this crowd, huh? It's amazing. All right, so we really want to talk about careers in Bitcoin. You know, a lot of the Bitcoin space has been really focused on development and programming and how we can use Bitcoin, but we really want to talk about how we can work in Bitcoin and how people across the world that not necessarily are just core developers, but they want to enter the space, how they can do so. So I have a bunch of questions, but at first I'd like to give each one of you a couple minutes to introduce yourself to the crowd, tell them what you do. We can start with Femi on the end.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Femi Longe. I'm program director at Kalil, which is a program that trains African software developers to build on and build for Bitcoin. I'm also, in a previous life, co-founder of the Co-Creation Hub, or CC Hub, which is the biggest social innovation and tech innovation center in Africa. Really great to be here.
Hello everyone, my name's Conor Okus. I'm a product manager at Spiral. So Spiral is an initiative within Block that supports the free open source software in Bitcoin. So we're currently funding close to 30 developers and designers and some PMs across 18 to 20 different countries now. So they're all working on different Bitcoin projects, everything from Bitcoin Core to software development kits, merchant solutions, Lightning infrastructure, Bitcoin design and user experience focused efforts as well. So we're really proud to be supporting the Bitcoin community in that way, and hopefully we can help support developers on the continent as well.
Is it on? Okay. Hi guys, I'm Abubakar Nur, and I'm CEO and CTO of Recursive Capital, which is a Bitcoin VC. I'm also a board member of B-Trust, which is basically a fund to support the Bitcoin open source development ecosystem. And I'm also one of the founding members of a program called Kalil, which helps basically train Bitcoin developers. And outside of that, I'm also a Bitcoin Core contributor and just a Bitcoiner, I guess.
So to get started, I wanted to talk about the funnel, the career funnel for Bitcoin. I know that Kala and B-Trust have a lot to do with this, but right now we're anticipating the demand for Bitcoin jobs to grow exponentially. And as that happens, the current developers in the Bitcoin space are limited. Like Bitcoiners in general are probably 1% to 2% of the global population. Bitcoin developers are a much smaller cohort of that. How do you guys see the non-Bitcoin developers in the world right now, the people who either don't know about Bitcoin at all, or they might have heard about Bitcoin but didn't hear really good things about it, like they might have heard the crypto version, and have a bad taste in their mouth. How do you see, us orange pilling them, or how do you see them entering the space, whether it's through physical spaces, through meetups, or through other ways of utility? How do you see that happening? We can start with Femi in the end.
Okay. Very interesting question, and it touches on a lot of what has been bothering me since I was brought in to bring the Kalil vision to life early this year. Like what I said, we train software developers, and particularly right now we're training experienced software developers across Africa, introducing them to Bitcoin, the concepts around Bitcoin, why Bitcoin is important, and how to build products on Bitcoin and how to start a career in Bitcoin. Now, a lot of the people we're working with, and there are quite a number of them in the room, from our first cohort and our next cohort, a lot of them have to make the decision to transition their career from traditional software development, whether working with mobile apps or to building exclusively for Bitcoin. And in making those decisions as Africans, there are a number of things that they have to take into consideration. Of course, the first one is livelihood. If you're a young person in Africa who's spent time building your education, going through university, once you get to the stage where you're going to get a job, there's a queue that's waiting for a portion of what you're going to earn. You have younger brothers, younger sisters, you have parents that you need to take care of. And so when you're thinking about a career, part of what you're thinking about is, how do I get a very good job with good remuneration that will allow me to take care of my responsibilities? And the question you ask when someone presents an opportunity in Bitcoin to you is, are there enough jobs in Bitcoin that can do that for me? At the moment, I don't think there are. I think there can be. I think there's a huge potential for that to be. But I think the current state of the Bitcoin ecosystem, the Bitcoin community of organizations that employ people in Bitcoin, I don't think there's enough of yet. And so I think one part of our work while we're training developers to increase the supply is that we also need to be doing a lot of active work on the demand from the organization side. And how do we build more companies in Bitcoin or leveraging Bitcoin to solve real problems that people have that require people with the competencies of a Bitcoin developer? And I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen in that light. But I also think for those of us that are Bitcoin educators and Bitcoin development educators, there's a lot that we need to understand around the technology stack of Bitcoin companies, what kind of skills they're looking for in developers, how that matches with the supply in the ecosystem at the moment, and I'm speaking specifically in Africa, how that matches with the skill set of a lot of developers across Africa, and how we find a way to balance that. In the context of our program, we're about to launch our second cohort, which is starting in January, and there are a number of people in that cohort in the room. One of the things that we're doing, so there are 8 software developers in the room from Nigeria and Uganda who, from January, will be going in the Kala actual practical Bitcoin development training program. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we're doing different in that cohort is we're bringing employers' technology into the curriculum. So as a part of the training, the guys will actually start working on code from Bitcoin companies so that they know what to expect when they get into the marketplace. Because sometimes also one part is the technology, the other part is culture and working culture. And so while on the one hand we can equip them with technical skills, we also need to be thinking about how do they actually fit into the culture and around the tech stack of the organizations that they're going to work with.
Conor, you want to give us?
Yeah, what can I touch on here? So, yeah, I think there's a couple ways to look at this. So, one is we really want to get developers excited to work on Bitcoin as well. So currently, it's very difficult to build on Bitcoin, to build with Bitcoin. It can take maybe like 6 to 8 months, maybe 12 months to build like a very basic wallet with basic send and receive and store your private key kind of functionality. So one of the things we're doing at Spiral is trying to be the catalyst that enables developers to build a bit faster and experiment quicker on Bitcoin. So we do this through some of our software development kits called the Bitcoin Dev Kit and the Lightning Dev Kit, which where the goal is to be able to like rapidly iterate and build Bitcoin experiences like in a couple of hours at a hackathon or over a weekend. this is perhaps where some of the other altcoins and other cryptocurrency projects maybe are a bit ahead in Bitcoin, because they have tools where they can build rapidly, and they also have community that they've invested in. So we've got an obligation to do that, and we are doing that. And you know, if you're technically inclined and you're watching a lot of the technical stuff that's happening, like, you should be like very excited about the stuff that's happening there. And then on the other side, Femi spoke a bit about, you know, the more like the private sector and developers being onboarded to companies, but there is this whole free open source part of Bitcoin as well that a lot of developers don't necessarily see as a serious career path, but we do have a few organizations within the Bitcoin space. Spiral is one, Chain Code, Human Rights Foundation, Super Luna, OKCoin, a lot of organizations that are providing no strings attached funding for you to be able to work on Bitcoin focused projects from kind of anywhere you want in the world, work at your own intensity, and start to contribute to Bitcoin in that way as well. I think that path does take perhaps a strong level of like mentorship is needed, and a lot more maybe hand holding is required initially, but I think over the long term, it definitely is a career path that should be taken quite seriously, in my opinion as well.
I mean, that's kind of the crux of the matter, because if you want to have a sustainable job in Bitcoin, especially as an open source developer, it's really difficult because it's quite lonely. There isn't exactly a direction to follow, which is something we've heard from even the folks that went through Kala, is that they need that sort of mentorship at the end of the day. And what's more important is the community, to be honest. And we've seen the likes of, you know, BDK build out communities on the technical side. I think what needs to happen is for folks to realize that the Bitcoin community has to still like be more general as opposed to like heavily technically focused. Because at the end of the day, for it to be sustainable, quote unquote, and have like proper jobs that actually pay long term, because at the end of the day, it's a lot of people that are Bitcoin companies, or at least companies in general in the space, when it comes to like crunch time and they're like failing, the first people that are out are like folks like designers, maybe marketing, and then they just narrow the team back down to a technical side. So I think a lot needs to be done in terms of obviously funding, and I think it's on multiple parts. So if you're an organization seeking to help out with open source funding, the way to go is kind of the spiral approach, the B-Trust approach, which is you attach a grant, which is an extended year, or at least for a long amount of time. Because at the end of the day, you don't want people grant hopping, which is very, very horrible for the space and as well for the development of the individual. And at the same time, you need the mentorship to provide that sort of, I guess, backbone for the developer to actually grow, mature, have people that they check in with for that sort of, I guess, development. And on the other side, if we're talking about exchanges, the easiest way obviously is to give back to the community through these fundings. So take a similar approach. All it takes is looking at the folks that are doing that, getting into conversations and finding out like what works, how you can help. And on the VC side, it's pretty interesting. You need to provide the funding for these companies to grow. And then for that growth, you need, I guess, a lot of hand holding, because we're still at an early stage. We don't have a lot of companies that are at that like huge whale stage where they have a lot of things figured out. It's really just a bunch of folks building cool shit. And all you have to do is really provide that funding, but also the support system. So whether it's interest to other VCs, potentially ensuring that they're not building too fast, or they're not getting into things that could really harm them down the line. So I think it's definitely a multifaceted approach that we need to take in general, so that the space is a lot more sustainable for anyone to come in, whether a developer, designer, etc.
And Abubakar, do you see that being just the companies that are building on Bitcoin only, or do you see existing legacy companies also adopting this approach and making Bitcoin career opportunities within their companies as well?
Yeah, they're doing a hell of a job outside of Bitcoin, especially in the general crypto space, which is why you tend to see people flock to shitcoin building, because at the end of the day, they already have that packaged community. It's like if you want to build on Coin X, you already have the VCs set up to wire the checks because they want all the hype of like we're funding a crypto project. You have the support systems of grants through those centralized organizations that actually issue these coins, which is another issue with it. But I think we have an opportunity as a Bitcoin community, really, because at the end of the day, we don't have any centralized figures in the space, so it means perpetually is always going to be a grassroots movement at the end of the day, which is very, very useful for a lot of us, because it means anyone at any point in time could help erect those structures, and as long as it's bottom up, is a lot more sustainable long term, and it's also devoid of like any sort of forced ideologies to kind of destroy the space, or I guess build it in sort of shape. But yeah, people can definitely come and help out with the space, and then they're able to build communities that reflect the values of that immediate community as opposed to like one organization.
Can I add to that? So when I look at the Bitcoin, and I've been a Bitcoiner for a long time, as in, no, I discovered Bitcoin a long time ago. I became a Bitcoiner in March. And I became a Bitcoiner to help train Bitcoin developers. And as I've studied the space, I've seen a big gap, which I think someone needs to fill if Bitcoin is going to achieve its potential. So there's a lot of work that's happening now, starting to be around education of Bitcoin developers. And that's necessary. We need people who can build with the technology. There's a lot of work at the other end of the spectrum, which is around educating the end users about Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And I think that is good, with a caveat. I think what will actually drive adoption is not if you tell people, is if you actually show them tools that they can use to build Bitcoin. I think where there's a big gap is that in the process of creating a product, there are lots of other expertise that are necessary where people need to understand the Bitcoin philosophy. So you need user experience people, you need product managers who understand Bitcoin philosophy. You need the product testers who understand Bitcoin philosophy. You need copywriters who understand Bitcoin philosophy. You need product marketers who understand Bitcoin philosophy. Who is teaching them? At the moment, there is that gap. And when it comes to utility, I'm seeing we're taking one approach in most cases, which is let's build the Bitcoin-only version of a popular app. So I'm going to build a Bolt powered or an Uber powered by Bitcoin. I think perhaps the bigger and a faster and probably a smarter way to go is to actually see how do we get Bitcoin integrations in every single popular app on the face of the planet. So what if Meta and Facebook had an entire team that's around their Bitcoin integration, or Uber having an entire team about Bitcoin integration, or Airbnb having an entire team of Bitcoin integration? Then Bitcoiners can start thinking about viable careers in these other organizations, so that when I'm training the people, I'm not only looking to match them into Bitcoin exchanges and very technical platforms only, which are very few, but I can also find jobs for them in traditional firms where they are at the heart of the Bitcoin team that's driving Bitcoin adoption. I think that way Bitcoin then becomes something that is utilitarian, that fits into people's lifestyle, and you have a whole swath of people in society who have careers which has a very good intersection of their technical expertise, but at their heart they are Bitcoiners and they understand the philosophy that drove the creation and drives the way Bitcoin runs as technology.
Yeah, I agree with that. Did you want to add to that, Conor? Did you want to add to that, or?
No.
Okay, cool.
Perfect.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think the introduction of those would also stabilize salary rates as well, so that African tax could also help to get paid. I have a question around the use cases on the current apps. Like you said, today the Ubers, the Metas, they're very easy to use. They're very, they're convenient. However, a lot of Bitcoin apps today, they usually take a technical person to be able to use it, or the UX is not as clean, or we're still in a nascent phase of development there. I guess the question is, where do you see efforts? Where would you put your efforts in terms of filling that gap and making a lot of these easier for people to use in the future, UX-wise, like make them more normal apps for people to want to use? And I guess, Conor, you could start with that one.
Yeah, so I think in general, building non-custodial Bitcoin solutions is far trickier than custodial solutions. We are, like I said earlier, we're building the tools that are trying to make that a little bit easier. One of the big things that Spiral has done is proliferate a Bitcoin design community. So a lot of people, like Femi mentioned, there's a lot of effort going into the Bitcoin developer, like raw technical skills. We do see some stuff around like marketing roles and copyright and all this kind of stuff, but there is one of the areas that we've actually tried to focus on is like the user experience and the design efforts around Bitcoin. So if there are any like designers in the room, you should definitely like head over to bitcoin.design, where there's a whole community. I think at least by the Slack channel numbers, there's over 1,000 designers in that community, all trying to solve different UX challenges. And we see a lot of collaboration between the Bitcoin design community and the Bitcoin development community. And this is all done in a fun and open source kind of way. There's no one, although like we helped plant the seeds for it, there's no one really at the head of it who is kind of doing this kind of matchmaking process where, for example, BTC Pay Server have a UX issue around how their merchants display their QR codes, for example, and they want a more unified experience. Like someone from that team can come over to the Bitcoin design community and say, look, I have this UX issue, or there's some new technology that is emerging, and we want to go through all of the use cases such that a person doesn't have to be, super technical to be able to take advantage of some of the up-and-coming technologies that's coming out. So I definitely think that designers have like a huge role to play in creating experiences that enable just like the average person to get the benefits of using Bitcoin without having to know necessarily what's going on under the hood. So like I say, if you're a designer, like you're very much needed in this space. So like, come and find me, chat to me, join the Bitcoin design community. That's an effort that is we're really proud to be supporting.
And as you can tell, the theme I'm trying to go for here is, it's not just developers, right? So, stepping even away from the development and design, how do you see the space in the energy sector, for example, having a lot of second-order jobs available? I guess, Abubakar, you could speak to any of the, energy plays that might be happening here in Africa, and what job opportunities might be there for people in that space.
Yeah, for sure. And just to tag off what Conor mentioned in the last question, it's at the end of the day, it's really utility that drives adoption. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what we need to focus on in terms of, I guess, amplifying the potency of that adoption is UX, which is why with Bitcoin, I think the best case scenario for us is to have open standards for UX. Obviously, you can't centralize the whole design because that doesn't work. It's an open community. So at first, the design community is definitely, I guess, the best approach we have moving forward in terms of kind of providing that common language that all these applications that provide all that utility can speak onto, that users can easily use, and then obviously have that sort of adoption we want. But on your question with regards to second order jobs, this is something that not a lot of people think about, but if you think about it, it's, at the end of the day, Bitcoin it's just a tool, really. And it has far-reaching effects because it's at the heart of, I guess, the most fundamental problem, which is like money. Money is the most fundamental human problem we have. So by providing a solution at that base level, you're able to easily see effects all across society, really, and communities. So I think part of the things that's pretty interesting is because of how Bitcoin works, specifically with the way it consumes energy, obviously to provide the security for the network as a whole, there are a lot of opportunities when it comes to people that are looking at more sustainable means of energy, or at least trying to erect energy systems in Africa, which the major issue they face is we have a ton of production, who's going to buy? No one. And the problem then becomes, okay, do we wait for buyers and then erect these productions? So it's a chicken and egg problem. But with Bitcoin, you have an always on demand buyer for this energy. Mm-hmm. So the good thing is because Bitcoin is this always on-demand buyer that's global, it means you could situate and co-locate these miners that consume the energy anywhere, virtually anywhere. So whether you're looking at solar, putting that to some of these miners, the benefit there is you now have a revenue stream immediately with this production that could bootstrap these energy production, I guess, what would I say, ventures that you're going after. And the good thing there is it means all that revenue coming in, or that money coming in for the mining process, could now be used to develop the local infrastructure. So we're talking about literally creating energy infrastructure anywhere in Africa that has that sort of bootstrap. All you do is scale down the mining over time. And just to finish off on the last point, it's for some of the things that we experience, like gas flaring, for example. Nigeria is one of the top gas flares in the world. It's not something that's good for us to have. It's just part of, our long rap sheet. The good thing with Bitcoin mining is, for the first time, you're able to actually productively use this energy that's actually just burnt out into the atmosphere and causing a lot of climate change issues. So it's really about thinking of ways in which mining could actually help with this sustainable development. And we're already seeing it all across the world, whether it's hydro, solar. So there's a lot of verticals. And I think on the job side, think of it. If we're creating these new societies, these new communities, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about individuals that are, drivers, we're talking about individuals that are helping with community building, we're talking about, miners, workers. It cuts across the entirety of the spectrum when it comes to jobs. So there are a lot of second-order jobs that I think are even more wide-reaching than just, devs having Bitcoin jobs, to be honest.
Yeah, I love that. So I wanted to get a bit personal with each one of you. I'd love to tell the audience about your challenges moving from your pre-Bitcoin working career days to what you're doing today, and what challenges you faced in transitioning. Because there are developers out there or non-developers out there that probably want to transition as well into a Bitcoin career, but are going to face some of these challenges. So maybe start with Femi. Tell me your story and the challenges you faced.
Before I talk challenge, maybe I talk opportunity.
That's a good way to do it.
And I think the first opportunity, and I think COVID helped in a strange way. The African continent is a rich location for talent for the rest of the world, and particularly for Bitcoin. And employers everywhere in the world need to recognize that it may be an opportunity they're missing if they don't have Bitcoiners, if they don't have Bitcoin developers from Africa in their team. And I think it's an opportunity, particularly for people who are representing companies here who have Bitcoin teams, but who don't have any African developers. So I think that's information I want to share first. And why is that important? I think, one, we have tons of extremely good developers who are in a perfect time zone, who, in many cases, your base remuneration in our countries, unfortunately, is good money. And with good work ethics, with strong work ethics, and who also live in the environment where the context of the need for Bitcoin is actually a part of their reality. So they're able to challenge design decisions, technology decisions about what you're building in the context of, will this work for the users in our kind of context? So I think that's an opportunity. Of course, the other side is we need to then get that development community to also understand that Bitcoin exists, and Bitcoin is an opportunity beyond just for personal freedom, also for the societal and economic freedom, and something that they can build a viable career in. As we build those matches, then the opportunities for them to intersect and work start to happen. And that's part of what excites me. Of course, the challenge there is making sure that I can complete that loop. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to promise someone that learn Bitcoin, make the transition from your average developer job into building on Bitcoin, and then I can't find roles for them. And so that's a challenge that bothers me. It's a challenge I'm trying to figure out how to fix. We're constantly learning in our program and constantly finding ways in which we can make the experience better so we can get a critical mass of developers through the door. And we're starting to get close to it. So we're going to have, this time next year, we're going to have way more African Bitcoin developers. So when we have a room like this, we're going to have way more African Bitcoin developers. Already as is right now, we have, in this room, we have about 18 people who 1 year ago were just learning what Bitcoin development is, who can now call themselves Bitcoin developers. Nice. And that's going to dramatically increase. We're also conscious that, yes, online communities are good, but Africa is a very high-touch society. So we can't leave everything to online interactions. Mm-hmm. So we're actually going to have to physically go into places and speak to developer communities. Last month, I was in Senegal and Gambia engaging with the developer community. And the goal in 2023 is to go into many more of these communities, because the diversity and the richness of the different parts of Africa are things that Bitcoin can benefit from, and it's something that the Bitcoin community itself can add value to or benefit from. And it's what excites me to do this job. So some of it may be challenges, but I see every one of them as opportunities.
So it sounds like if I'm looking for a space in the Bitcoin ecosystem, I should leave my home, go to one of these spaces, meet people in person, talk, learn, and that's kind of the best ways you can kind of immerse yourself. And
absolutely.
Conor, what do you think? What challenges have you had, or what challenges would you help people overcome?
It's a challenge, but I do think it's a nice one. It's a challenge, like, it's from the open source side. It's like, where do I start? Because you might be new or semi-new, and what projects do I start? Do I dive headfirst into working on Bitcoin Core? There's this kind of lightning stuff going on. Should I start over there? But then some people are building software development kits. Should I start here? So you kind of really have to, I guess you have to think about the area you might want to have an impact in, whether it be improving Bitcoin's kind of, the way we look at Xspiral is like improving privacy, scalability, kind of the user experience or the security, whatever it might be. We have a host of projects that we list on our site, on our website, spiral.xyz. That might be a good starting point to decide on like what project you actually want to contribute to. And then once you've decided, okay, this is the area I want to work on, and it doesn't differ too much whether you're like a developer or someone who wants to write documentation or someone who wants to be a community builder. It doesn't differ that much. This method doesn't differ that much, and I think we're doing a workshop tomorrow, and we can definitely dive into some more of the details. But yeah, you want to pick a project, you want to, and there's challenges around that, knowing which one to pick, knowing where you can have the most impact. But when you have picked one and you found a liking to one, join the community. Like, hang out in the Slack, hang out in the Discord, find out who the lead maintainers are, go onto the GitHub, find good first issues to work on, whether it be like changing some documentation, whether it be writing a test for a part of the code that's not been covered, whether it be like spinning up a social media account for the community because they don't have one yet. Whatever it might be, find what it is you can do within that community. So join the community. Be very humble when you do so. Don't necessarily go in there like stomping your feet, but just find out kind of what the needs of that community are. And yeah, look to review things. Take time. Look to review the code, or if you're a developer, look at how code is structured. Look at how some of the decisions have been made. Ask intelligent questions, and yeah, ultimately get yourself to a point where you can actually start adding functionality and adding significant contributions. So those are like some of the things you might want to think about when starting off with a career on the open source side. Yeah, I think those are some tangible, practical, cool things you can do. But yeah, I think as well, like Femi said, like there is this side that you kind of have to understand a lot of the principles behind Bitcoin as well, because many of the technical decisions are actually underpinned by Bitcoin's philosophy around being decentralized and being secure as possible. So there is that side of your education and your journey that you have to take just as seriously as cultivating your technical skills as well. So that can be a challenge in and of itself, because you know, who you choose to look up to as your educator and your spokesperson can play a real impact on how you see Bitcoin and your vision for Bitcoin as well. So you need to choose your educators wisely as well.
To that point, where would you guide people to make sure they're looking at the right people for education and not going in the wrong direction?
I mean, I'm biased. Like, I'm from the school of like Andreas Antonopoulos, so I really like Andreas. Like, he's like giving me like the perspective to look at Bitcoin from many different angles. So I'm biased in that regard, but that's by no means everyone should like go to that source, and like that's not the source of truth or anything like that. So we have many great educators. So you have to find the people or the group of people who resonate with you the most, and make sure you do your best to listen to all perspectives as well, because you might cultivate your own view of what Bitcoin is as well, having listened to these different people. So.
And Abubakar, your journey was pretty amazing itself. What challenges would you say you wanted to highlight, and how would you advise people that might take your path?
I mean, we all essentially start out the same. We hear about crypto or Bitcoin or Web3, and then we read a bunch of articles and then get misinformed, and then read a bunch of promises, and then down the line you realize that a lot of it can only be actualized through Bitcoin. And I think some of the challenges obviously has to do with your first reference point, which is, I guess, as Conor put it, I think you just have to find the right piece of information to get in. I mean, even if you don't know anything about Bitcoin, or if you know something a little bit about Bitcoin, I think what's important is finding sources that, first of all, distinguish between what you've already learned and what you actually don't know. So the challenge for us is, on the education side, is you're actually battling both ignorance and misinformation. So it's kind of a case where we just have to ensure that we understand what stage of the process they're at, and then we're able to provide resources that's helpful. So if they already know something about crypto, they're likely misinformed about Bitcoin. So then we go the approach of, hey, crypto is not Bitcoin, and this is what Bitcoin is. If they don't know anything, even better, because now it's a blank slate which we could easily orange pill them. But in general, I think the major problem you have in this space is that sort of path dependency, or I guess path finding, to be honest. And the interesting thing is, with Bitcoin, there are so many layers to it, really. There's like a super deeply entrenched technical layer, and there's like the high level where you understand at least the implications. And I think what individuals need to do is to realize that you don't necessarily need to know the technicals. Same way with other infrastructure we have, like the internet. You don't necessarily have to be like a protocol engineer, for example, to actually provide value, whether it's as an entrepreneur or maybe a marketer or something. Mm-hmm. So I think they just need to find what layer of Bitcoin they're able to, I guess, provide value. And then they're able to do that. I mean, there's language translation, there are a bunch of things. But just to close off with this, I think what's most important, I think, in this conversation is why bring on African developers into the Bitcoin space? And it's actually, I think the major thing to consider is the very fact that Africa, by virtue of a lot of adversity, has individuals that are instilled with a survival instinct, so to speak. And that really helps because their thinking is mostly in terms of, I guess, providing some sort of resilience, really, whether it's day to day. So a lot of people tend to say, Nigerians are hustlers, Africans in general, and that's as a result of really that natural instinct of surviving. So I think for us to have more Africans in the space, it's really to provide that sort of point of view where you're building for resilience long term. And Bitcoin is going to benefit greatly from that, because at the end of the day, what's the point of everything we're building if tomorrow, the network crashes or something horrible happens? So you need individuals with that sort of foresight and that sort of ingenuity to come onto the space to really help. And really, I think the only community in the world that could benefit from a global, development ecosystem is Bitcoin, because at the end of the day, we have no rulers. It's essentially ruled by the majority, which that's kind of the best case scenario for us as Africa, to be honest.
We were talking backstage a bit about bringing that kind of conversation to the average person, especially in Africa, or specifically in Africa, and bringing the concept of the future and the long-term, low time preference benefits of working in the Bitcoin space, of using Bitcoin. How do you bring that conversation to them, knowing that the future is not something that people think about that often? You're more thinking about what you need to happen now, or what you need to happen in the near future, not the unforeseen future. I guess Femi can start.
I think the beauty of Bitcoin is when you know where someone is at, you can explain Bitcoin to them based on where they're at. Sometimes we end up trying to force the same conversation on everybody, even when they're not from that space. Yes, censorship resistance is an important topic, but it's not an important topic to everybody. And if you want the person to get Bitcoin, if you come from the angle of censorship resistance, it's not what bothers him. If all I'm thinking about is how I'm going to pay for the school fees for my school in the UK from Nigeria, if that's the angle you use to bring Bitcoin to me, it makes it easy for me to understand why it's useful. If my concern is how I'm going to get resources from my brother who is in Canada, it makes it easy for me to see what Bitcoin is. So I think the starting point, rather than telling, should actually be to first find out where people are, and then use that as the basis to actually get them to understand what exactly it is and why it's useful for them. In the context of people who we want to build a career in Bitcoin, increasingly I'm realizing that, particularly from a developer standpoint, the technology part of Bitcoin is one part, but when you actually explain the economics of Bitcoin to them, it's also a way, it's also something that they can understand. Again, if you put it in their context. So I'd say the starting point for people who don't want you to tell me what the future would look like when Bitcoin is everywhere is find out where I am right now and tell me what Bitcoin means to me based on where I am right now. Everyone wants faster, cheaper, better, safer, freer, not controlled in their own context. I think we need to do more work in finding out people's context. It doesn't always come naturally, but I think it's something that the community needs to start adopting more.
Did you want to add to that, Conor?
No, I don't think I had anything to add. That's
Okay.
perfect, but you should just definitely think of Bitcoin as I think about Bitcoin as a very long-term career. I'm looking at it from perspective, I want to be working on this for the next 10, 15, 20 years potentially. And I think, trying to cultivate the mindset that it is, it's a more of slow and steady wins the race type of technology that we're building. Although I did hear someone mention earlier, we've only got 7 years to get this right, so better get things in gear. But it's definitely something you should think about as a serious long-term career, and as it grows, there's going to be many different avenues and opportunities for you. So
Yeah. And I think just to close it off, really, I think Femi brings up a very, very good point, which is finding that context. But in general, I guess in the general conversation we're having about careers in general, I think two things are immediately important, I think, is the value that you get from your career path, as well as how sustainable it is, job security-wise for us specifically. And I think if you're looking at the landscape of possible career choices, when it comes to Bitcoin, I think is probably the most I guess, the career pathway that has the most longevity long term. Because at the end of the day, it's the tool that I personally believe will lead us to financial freedom on the continent. So if you think about it at that sort of long time horizon, it means all the jobs that you're getting right now, you're essentially keying into the long-term battle for financial freedom. And I think that's probably the most powerful, I guess, point we could provide, or at least highlight to people that are thinking about careers in general, which is, if you want to really help out long-term, the easiest way is to actually get a Bitcoin career or a Bitcoin job, really, if you really want to get into the fight for financial freedom.
I agree. And to wrap it up, I guess the last question will be probably pointed more towards because every career has an employer and an employee, right? It's a trade of labor for value. Speaking to the employers at this point, like what would you say, or how would you think would be the best way to approach existing companies that could start bringing people into the Bitcoin space by offering, to your point, a Uber with a Bitcoin department or a Facebook with a Bitcoin department? What would those companies need to see, or would they just show up at one of the physical spaces and start meeting people? What do you think that looks like? I guess Abubakar, you could start there.
Okay. I mean, so with regards to companies, funny enough, a lot of companies that we speak to at Recursive, like that are in the traditional fintech space, a lot of them actually want to key into Bitcoin, but they just don't know how. And part of that is because there aren't a lot of developers. And another thing, obviously, is that there's a huge, I guess, gray area when it comes to regulation in general. Ironically, it's because there isn't regulation to begin with, which is where the grayness comes from. And I think you definitely have to start on different points. So for a lot of these companies, it's first and foremost getting it straight that a lot of the stuff that they've heard about, for example, like Bitcoin being banned in Nigeria, is wrong, it's not the case. And then explain what actually is going down on the ground, which is, with regards to exchanges not having bank accounts to use those for trades, and likewise individuals not specifying, this is a Bitcoin transfer. P2P still exists. So I think for us, this is what is actually on ground, regulatory-wise. And then more importantly is, what's the value proposition of the company to begin with? Is it a company focused on maybe getting paid in Bitcoin, for example, like Bitwage? Is it a company that's doing, ride sharing? Is it a company that's specifically, engaging in financial services? And if it's financial services, probably the easiest sell really for Bitcoin, because again, you have a cheap, fast, instant monetary network that you're keyed into on day one. So I think there's a lot of conversations that need to be had on those fronts. And more importantly, I think moving forward, it will have to be a lot of, I guess, carrying along on multiple fronts. So not only companies that that are trying to get into the space, but regulators, folks that are just average folks in government, the whole lot. We just have to ensure that at each level, we're exposing them to the part of Bitcoin that is most useful for them to be able to productively provide value, or at least provide an enabling environment for everyone else to thrive, really.
To add, I think we probably need to do some strategic orange peeling of the key people that make some very important product decisions in some of those companies. Yeah. And with the intention to actually let them see the pathway and why this is critical. Like Abubakar said, once they see where the benefit is for them and their business long term, even if it is experimental, something that they can shut off because one part of their fear is usually regulation and risk. But do it in a way that we get them to actually start considering, put together a small team to actually investigate, with the understanding that they can turn on where necessary. I think the second bit is how much they know about what exists in terms of libraries, in terms of community, in terms of resources, when they actually have to integrate those. And I don't think in lots of those companies, enough of them know about what exists. So there's work that we need to do also in helping them figure out, helping them walk through the steps. I think from, again, my work in the African startup ecosystem, that it's actually easy to turn on some of that in the African context than for even some of the global apps. Because one, the need is bigger, the regulators are slower, and the competition is growing, particularly in the fintech space, and businesses are constantly looking for advantages. If we can tell them, if we can show them, if we can support them, potentially if we can invest in support. I'd love to have a rider team of African Bitcoin developers that I can second into existing companies to actually help them figure out ways in which integrating Bitcoin can work for them. Helping them figure out what libraries to use, what stack to use that fits in with the existing system. And a part of that team's job would also be helping them to understand the Bitcoin philosophy, which is critical, and orange pilling key people in those startups. Again, I said in the African context, because that's the environment I know, the opportunities and the possibilities are a lot. I know there are a number of African fintech startup founders who are interested, but just don't know how to navigate their way, particularly when they're making the product decisions. And I think it's a place that we can field test. And I know if it works in some of them, it becomes part of the case study that we use for the argument for the bigger global product companies too.
Agreed. Did you want to give any advice to the businesses out there, Connor?
Well, I mean, biased again, but I like the model that we have at Block, where a small percentage of your research budget can go into creating a team of full-time developers, copywriters, product managers internally who are focused on, cutting-edge Bitcoin stuff, focused on, like Femi said, integrations in different ways, as well as contributing and learning about how the Bitcoin ecosystem actually works. Like it can, especially these very large organizations, again, for a very small allocation of your budget, like you can really have a strong impact, both on the open source side and within your business. And we've seen this with our team who's built their own Lightning implementation with the Lightning development kit, a project that was chosen independently, like it wasn't passed down to us, or the team came together and chose it as a project because they felt that was going to have the most impact, and it turned out it was a tool that was used by Cash App, one of the other businesses, an independent business unit within the company, to do their Lightning integrations. So like now, Cash App get the benefit of kind of being at the forefront of things that are happening in the Bitcoin space, and the company, get to kind of be at the forefront and contribute back to Bitcoin open source software as well. So I think that's a model that very, very large organizations can kind of adopt.
I love that. I mean, all the advice of large organizations being able to either adopt it from within or talk to people that can give them advice from outside is amazing advice, both for the businesses and for the developers out there, and non-developers, and designers, and blue-collar workers, and anybody out there, whatever you're doing, educators, healthcare workers, there's obviously a place for you here working in Bitcoin. And you'll be just joining the fight to be able to free the money from the empires that are out there. So I thank you three for this great discussion. It's been really helpful for me, and I hope it's been helpful for all the developers out there, or all the potential future career people out there. Because I know almost everyone in this room in the future is going to be working in Bitcoin. It's inevitable. So I just welcome you from now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me.